I'm going to open up the waiting room. Good morning and welcome. I'm going to give it a couple, maybe one more minute just while folks are getting their audio set up here. Okay, well, thank you for joining us this morning. We are going to just go over some of the basics of the Community Wildfire Defense Grant Program. My name is Shauna Morris. I am the Community Wildfire Defense Grant Program Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Forestry. Um, I also have Brittany Hankins on the call here with us. She will be serving as our support person for Zoom things, Zoom technical support in the background. So thank you, Brittany, for helping us here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. Okay, so my role as the Community Wildfire Defense Grant Program Coordinator is to provide technical support for anyone in Oregon that is interested in applying for the program. And so, questions that you have as you're working through applications, that kind of thing, go ahead and send it my direction. And we'll do the best we can to get you some good, solid answers. If I don't know the answer to a question, I always reach out to the Forest Service staff. Their grants and agreements folks are very helpful. This webinar will be recorded in case you can't stay for the entirety of the time here. And then I will post it on our Oregon Department of Forestry public website. And it will be posted under the fire prevention page where CWDG info is located. Okay, so getting right into it here, the Community Wildfire Defense Grant gave us 1 billion in funding nationwide. It was brought to us by that bipartisan infrastructure law, which included language to ensure that the program prioritizes communities that have a high or very high wildfire hazard potential, are low income, and have been impacted by a severe disaster. And you see, originally this funding source was supposed to be for 5 years. The Forest Service has informed us recently, just last month, they said for sure that there are only going to be 4 years of funding for the program. So we are in round three, and we will have one more round after this round. So that is official. Initially, they had intended to provide 200 million each year. And so the last couple of years, they've given a little bit over that. And so it will be short 1 year, one round. Um, this is a good time for me to say that we will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Um, so we are recording for one, and then also we've disabled the chat just because you should have that Q&A feature, and you can go ahead and type your questions in as they come. We might address some of those questions as we go through the slides. So we'll talk through those at the end. If you'd prefer to ask your question, we'll go ahead and have you raise your hand, and then we'll unmute you so you can get that question answered. So we'll have time for that for sure. And so in addition, This program will help communities in the wildland urban interface meet the goals of the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy, and specifically those first two goals, which are the maintain resilient landscapes and create fire adapted communities. Eligible entities for this program include local governments, Indian tribes, state forestry agencies, HOAs, Alaska Native corporations, and other nonprofits. Um, these organizations have to be at risk of wildfire. That's one of the main elements for eligibility. There are two different uh, parts to this funding structure. And so one of the elements you can apply for funding for would be a CWPP development or revision. The other would be a project implementation. And so you would be allowed to apply for both if you met those qualifications. You would have to apply for them in separate applications. So that's why they break it out this way. And so if you are interested in applying for a CWPP development or revision, your current one would have to be more than 5 years old in order to do so. And then that max grant award would be the 250,000. There would be a match requirement of 10%, and then underserved communities can qualify for that match waiver. Timeline for completion is 5 years. And if you're interested in applying for a project implementation, the activities that you're applying for must be identified within a CWPP that is not more than 10 years old. That max grant award is that 10 million. The cost share match requirement is 25%. It can be waived if you are considered an underserved community. And then that timeline for completion of the grant is still that 5-year timeline. Lands that are eligible for funding include private lands, local government, homeowner associations, state government, tribal or Alaska Native corporations. This does include trust lands. And so the projects need to benefit a community that is at risk of wildfire. So again, coming back to that theme. If you're interested in doing an application for a project, just wanting to reiterate that you have to tie it back to your CWPP, whether that is more at the local level or mostly in Oregon, we have countywide CWPPs. And so your proposal must advance the objectives and priorities that you have identified in the CWPP, and then it can't be more than 10 years old. And so the Forest Service has given us a little bit of a buffer on that. And so if your CWPP was signed, finalized during the calendar year 2014 or later is what their restrictions are on that. And so just showing you a few of the resources. I know sometimes it seems like there are so many resources for a lot of grant programs that it's hard to really narrow down the best places to go where the information is pretty clear. And so I just have a few sources that I wanted to share with you. This is what the Forest Services page looks like for their CWDG program page. They do have listed the applicant webinars that they presented the first week of December. They have recordings there. They also are doing office hours every other week for January and February. So through the the end of the deadline for the application, which is February 28th. So you can find those there. You can find the Zoom links there to join that. Also, grants.gov provides some information for us. The notice of funding opportunity is listed on grants.gov. It can be a few clicks and downloads to access it. So in addition, I've also placed the notice of funding opportunity on our ODF program page. So the grants.gov site also has the pre-award guide for applicants. You know, in case you want to go back to the original source, you can also just go to grants.gov and type in CWDG. You should be able to access it that way, or this QR code that I have on screen here. This is our Oregon Department of Forestry public page, and so we have some additional resources listed under grant opportunities. Office hours that I will be holding once a week, each Tuesday, 3 to 4 p.m., January and February, just through the end of the application period. That Zoom link is on there. In addition, I've created this just one pager of different resource links that you can find there on the page. I try to just compile all the links that I thought would be very helpful in, you know, going through your narratives and each box, even you know, the sam.gov information, some Oregon specific, like the link to the Oregon State Forest Action Plan, the Oregon Explorer map, if you want to include that as part of your application. Lots of good resources there. This QR code here will get you there if you're struggling to find it. Sorry about that. Okay, and so many of you might be familiar with this CWDG tool. The Forest Service has compiled several different resources and put them into one place, just trying to help us navigate the different sources that we need for our applications. And so if you're not familiar with this and you haven't used it before, there is a search box up at the top, and you're able to put in your county, your city, town, whatever level that your project or CWPP is going to be serving. And then it gives you different resources for several of the boxes in the application. So I did a search here for Portland. This is going to serve as our example here. And it tells us right away eligibility. It tells us, yes, Portland is considered at risk. It has a higher wildfire risk to homes than 42.5% of communities in the state. And then it also gives us a source there, that source that they're using and pulling information from. In addition, in the top right corner of each box, it gives us an opportunity to just hover over that little piece of paper in the corner, and we can copy and paste, and we can copy and paste this text directly to our application. And next, it will give us some information about those 3 priority areas that this funding source is aimed toward. And so it tells us about low-income community. Does our community qualify for the low-income guidelines? It also tells us about severe disaster impacts for our area. It pulls in FEMA data to show those different FEMA declared disasters. And then it also pulls in information about your wildfire hazard potential according to national data sets. And so you'll see that of these 3 priorities, Portland doesn't qualify for being low income status. The Forest Service has directed us that This tool is the best tool as far as showing that your area is low income, making that case. However, the language in the notice of funding opportunity does allow you to try to make your case. If you're not showing clearly that your area is low income here, the notice of funding opportunity specifically on page 23 talks about the criteria for this program, and it has to be the low income community is defined as an application jurisdiction, so community, county, or tribal area that has less than 80% of the median household income of its state or of the nation. So, if you think you can find another source to talk through that and try to make your case, nothing's preventing you from doing that. A little bit more about severe disaster impacts, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in the presentation. But these are not the only sources of disasters that you would be able to use as a source. Um, drought declarations would be an option. Other maybe statewide disasters that might not show up here. Most of the winter storms do show up here, so you can use those and, speak to how that storm might be increasing your wildfire risk in your area, in the project area. And then lastly, that number three, that wildfire hazard potential. If your area is not showing as high or very high wildfire hazard potential in this data, it may still qualify for the points here using state or local data. So you can explore the Oregon Explorer if you have maybe a local risk assessment that was done and can point back to that data to try to make your case. That question is 20 points of the application, and so very significant. Um, if you have questions about trying to qualify for those points, certainly reach out to me and we can talk through that a little bit. Some of the coastal towns, the west side of the Cascades, some of those areas can be tricky to show high or very high wildfire hazard potential. And then lastly, here in this CWDG tool, they talk about cost share waiver and whether your area is considered underserved community and therefore eligible for that cost share waiver. This source pulls in information from the Climate Economic Justice Screening Tool, that CJES tool. And so it does include different elements in addition to whether the area is low income. So good to use this tool. It's really trying to help you navigate some of the answers and including those sources pretty easy for you. Okay, sam.gov. So for this application, sam.gov registration is a requirement, and you will want to have an active SAM registration at the time of application. This is the landing page for sam.gov. Of note, if you're asked to pay a fee for registration, then you're likely on a third-party website. So we've had some folks that, click on something for SAM registration and it's actually a third party. So SAM registration is free through the federal government. Some of the steps in the process can be a bit confusing. I will tell you that full entity registration will include the first step is usually getting that unique entity ID number, but you'll also want to complete the assertion section, the representations and certifications, and then they'll ask you some other business information. So this process can take more than a month to complete. And so if your entity doesn't have an updated registration, now would be a good time to start that process just because, it can take sometimes they say even more than 4 weeks to get that fully completed. On that main page for sam.gov, they do have an entity registration checklist. It tries to help walk you through the different steps. I've noticed they do move it around quite a bit on their site, so it's tough to share a link for just because the links break rather quickly. Um, but if you are interested in finding this and you can't find it through the sam.gov site, feel free to let me know. And I've downloaded a PDF version of it, so I can definitely share that with you. And you'll see that there are two different types of registration if you're interested in all awards, which is this first one here with the little blue ribbon. That would allow you to bid on contracts and other procurements. Um, Most of us probably will be just needing to complete the section for financial assistance awards. And so down here, it'll walk you through, and you'll get that unique entity ID. You'll be asked some core data about your organization. You'll complete the representation and certification section, and then enter in points of contact for your organization. If you are interested in applying to either create or update a CWPP, some things just to think about as you're developing your proposal. How will you maintain or update the CWPP going forward? Are you maybe going to meet once a year and revise or put in some addendums, those kinds of things? Consider creating separate chapters for different areas in your county to address specific concerns and capture necessary details at the community level. So this is an example here, this screenshot of Douglas County. I think this is a little bit old now. They've rearranged it a bit, but you'll see, if you can see, the font is a bit small. But they've broken out different areas in their county by chapter. And so those smaller communities can still have input, at the community level, give their priorities and the projects that they really feel are important, and it can still be included in one countywide CWPP, which seems to work pretty well for Oregon. Consider process efficiencies and the resources needed to make future updates. So most likely you're familiar with how many organizations it takes to come together to create a CWPP or get an update going. So just some considerations here as we're talking through it. If you are applying for a project, we talked about this a little bit, but ensure that you do link the project that you are applying for to your CWPP. So be specific when you're describing that connection. Also, you will be required to provide the link to the online version of your CWPP. It is helpful if you provide a page number or refer to a table or map. Think about how the scorer can easily find this information when they're looking for it. Most scorers will pull that up. The Forest Service verification process will verify for eligibility that you provide a link to your CWPP. In addition, this year, the Forest Service has allowed us to send them an email. They've created an inbox. And so this is that email that you would be able to send any documents to. You would be able to send a PDF version of your CWPP if for some reason it might not be online, or if you're just wanting to, ensure that they have that backup documentation, you're able to do that and go ahead and send them an email. What you would want to include would be what state you are from, the title of your application, and then the name of your organization so that they are able to, on their end, attach any documents and get them sent out with your application during the scoring process so that the scorers will also be able to see any documentation that you bring forward. County CWPPs and additional information can be found on our Oregon Department of Forestry website. This is that Community Wildfire Protection Plan page, and you see that the counties are listed here. And so most of those links are updated and active. If there's one for some reason you're not able to find, let me know and I might be able to help track it down. Christy Shaw is our National Fire Plan Coordinator. If you're, have questions about different resources and things like that in creating a new CWPP or updates, I can help get you in contact with her as well. She's definitely our expert here at ODF. All right, and moving into just some updates that are pertinent to our application here. Um, the Code of Federal Regulations has been updated, and so I believe these updates came into effect in October last year. These regulations guide us in the different aspects of federal grant workings, and so I've just listed a few of them here. There are definitely more updates, but these are some that I knew would be really pertinent to our discussion and our application. So the equipment threshold has increased. And so previously it was at 5,000. If a piece of equipment or a purchase was over 5,000 or more, um, it would definitely be considered a piece of equipment. And so, there are some additional documentation that we would need to send in if you are awarded funding. Now that limit is 10,000. So, in similarly, then the supply threshold is 10,000. So if there is, something that is in your budget that is $9,000, that can be considered a supply versus a piece of equipment now. These are the different live links, and so I will have this PowerPoint presentation on our ODF website as well if you want to get in there and do a little bit more digging on the updates. Lastly, that de minimis rate. So when you're developing your budget and you have an indirect rate put in there for charges that cannot be considered like a direct charge to your grant. Previously, that de minimis rate for indirect was 10%, and now it is 15. So a little bit about indirect costs. It can be a bit confusing. We get a lot of questions about indirect rates and costs and things like that. If your organization has a NICRA agreement with the federal government, then you would refer to that for any contractual guidelines. We don't charge indirect on equipment purchases, and that's part of the guidelines as well. If you don't have a NICRA, so not negotiated indirect cost rate, then you can default to that 15% de minimis rate. And so indirect costs would be a cost of an organization that can't be readily assigned to a particular project, but are necessary to the operation of the organization and to the performance of the project. And this table gives us a couple of examples. Operating and maintaining facilities, depreciation, administrative salaries, those kinds of things. And then some additional info on indirect can be found in the 2 CFR 200, 414, if you want to look up that for more information. And getting into the application itself, one of the frequent questions that I received the last couple of rounds, when folks are in the live application on the application portal, this requires that first page there up at the top, right? It requires us to put in a keyword or we won't be able to submit the application. So once you have everything copied and pasted over to the live version of the application, you'll want to make sure you have something in that keyword box. So this keyword should be a shortened version of your project title. Ideally, it will still be specific to your project. If you label it just CWPP or defensible space, um, we might have several that have the same keyword. And that's how, for instance, I see it in the background in the application portal. So we might have several named the same. For your application to stand out, you might want to put in, your area or maybe the name of your organization, just a shortened version, something like that. I put this just screenshot of the PDF version of the application in here. There can be some confusion just around which questions have points associated with them and which questions don't. So the first several questions in the application are collecting, data from your organization. Those are not scored boxes. And so in this year's, the numbering is off a little bit from year to year, but in this year's application, everything before box 7 and before doesn't have a point score associated with it. Once you get to the project description question, that's when the boxes start having the points associated. And so in this year, that's box 8. At the end, once applications have been scored, this is what you are going to have access to. So you'll be able to see in the forestrygrants.org application portal, you'll be able to see how each of your questions scored, and you can review your total score there as well. And so just wanted to show you this as far as those first questions are not scored. So if you see zeros on those, do not be alarmed. They don't count toward the total. Okay, for the project description box, I'll just go through kind of a couple of frequently asked questions here. For the project description, you will want to read through the question for each of them, really. You'll want to read through each question in the application. You'll also want to go ahead and take a look at the scoring rubric. And so I wanted to just point out the scoring rubric is in the notice of funding opportunity. This is what each scorer will have access to and will have in front of them as they're reading through each box in your application. So the CWPP proposals will have a separate scoring rubric here on the left and have a little bit different point criteria for, the high score of 7 to 10 points. And similarly, there is a separate scoring rubric for project proposals. So you'll want to definitely read through that and just ensure that you have a good understanding of those elements that those scorers are going to be looking for as they read through your narrative. Severe disaster impact. And so this is a question that we've had a lot over the last couple of rounds. It can be a bit tricky. Just the question itself can be a bit tricky. So here on this top box here, this is how the application reads. And so, it talks about, has your community been impacted by a severe disaster within the previous 10 years? Please respond yes or no. Pretty easy, straightforward. If yes, provide a link to the verification source and demonstrate how it has impacted the location. It tells us that this is a two-part question and that wants us to read the directions very carefully. So, following up on additional directions that the Notice of Funding Opportunity gives us, there is this section in the Notice of Funding Opportunity that is labeled Scoring Criteria, and it gives us a little bit more of an idea of what they are looking for that question. And so I've underlined this in orange here. It says, note, simply listing a disaster here will not suffice. You must explain how this disaster has impacted the community's wildfire risk and hazard. Not all disasters will qualify for points if it cannot be shown that they have influenced the community's risk or hazard. So a good example that the Forest Service shared with us on one of the webinars recently was often communities will use a wildfire that has happened as their disaster. And so thinking through that a little bit might be hard to, determine that your wildfire risk has increased after the fire. Where some folks might think of, after a wildfire burns, especially in the first year or so, your risk might actually be reduced if, vegetation and things are really no longer as present as they were before. And so, some additional guidance that I like to give folks is maybe think more about winter storms or high wind events. Even drought declarations would be very helpful for showing how your area has had increased wildfire hazard potential. I like to recommend that folks make your statement really clear. So, yes, this disaster has, in the case of a winter storm, increased dry vegetation on the ground and therefore increased our wildfire hazard risk. So, super clear, super straightforward. If you want to talk more about wildfires and those disasters, you're very welcome to do so and maybe talk about how, that has increased the wildfire hazard potential in your area. And then the scoring rubric here, it just wants to be sure that you have down here, this last little section, an explanation of how the disaster has impacted the wildfire risk or hazard. And I would even say, rather than impacted, we want to see how it has increased that wildfire risk or hazard. If you have any questions about this box in particular, please feel free to reach out to me and we can talk through, maybe some of the wording or something like that. I'm happy to read through it for you and give you thoughts. And then just some of the examples of eligible projects. I've took screenshots just of how it's listed in the NOFO here. I won't read through all of them, but I wanted to at least put them on here so this slideshow can serve as a nice resource for people. So if you are wanting to develop a CWPP proposal, creation or development, um, or also wildfire section for hazard mitigation plan. So um, we are leaning toward, of course, CWPPs. And then you can update an existing plan if it is more than 5 years old. So if it's less than that, you wouldn't be eligible for this funding source. Ineligible projects would be a creation or update of forest stewardship plans. Examples of planning projects. So I'll just read through a few here. Contract support to assist the community with developing building costs, zoning ordinances, or land use planning. Tabletop or functional exercises to test effectiveness of community wildfire planning. Direct staff support is eligible for community wildfire mitigation, leadership, coordination. Training in the use of proven effective mitigation practices is eligible. Some of the things that would not be eligible over here would be a GIS or database system unless they support your CWPP. So um, business, small business startup funding is not eligible. Research and development projects nor economic development projects would be eligible. And then under wildfire prevention, education, and outreach, there are several eligible projects here. Firewise or similar programs, outreach to communities and property owners. Property inspections and or assessments are eligible. Training to conduct property inspections or assessments. Adoption, implementation, enforcement, training of the National Fire Protection Association codes or similar. Ineligible listed here, it would just be printing of anything without being actually tied to an organized outreach or education program. And this is very text heavy. Again, just wanted it to serve as a resource for folks that are finding it and not wanting to leave anything out. But I'll read through just a couple here. These are those eligible fuel reduction and or restoration projects that are eligible. So defensible space around homes, businesses, and other structures, development, creation, or maintenance of fuel breaks and fire breaks, including shaded fuel breaks, fuels reduction beyond defensible space, adjacent to at-risk communities is eligible, reduction of hazardous fuels through the application of prescribed fire. In addition, prescribed fire training, including training on smoke management associated with prescribed fires, is eligible. This program is a little bit unique in that it does allow for equipment. And one of those other unique features is that it does allow for this bottom bullet here, design and installation of dry hydrants and cisterns. And so, speaking of equipment, it does give us a little bit of guidance on which equipment would be eligible. So you can definitely read through that, some limitations on wood chippers, things like that. Air curtain burners or trench burners are allowable under this program. Also allowable would be equipment and supplies needed to support prescribed fire. And so, one sort of watch out with equipment and supplies, especially around prescribed fire and some of these bullets listed under prescribed fire. When you're talking through them in your narrative, just be sure it's clear that the equipment is for prescribed fire versus suppression efforts. So something to kind of think about there. Ineligible projects would be anything that would be considered capital improvements. So building remodel, bridges or road construction and water development would not be allowed through this program. No home hardening, nothing related to fire suppression training or equipment, and then drones are not eligible. And talking about the budget a little bit in the application, you will see this table. When we think about match and calculating match, whether it's the 10% or the 25%, you will want to calculate your match on that total project cost here in the totals on the bottom right. Sometimes that can be confusing if we're going to provide match for just the amount we've asked for, or if it is for the total project cost. These can be helpful calculations when we are trying to calculate that match. Um, so, if you have a project that is a 25% match, a good way to think about it is the sponsor, Forest Service in our case, is contributing 75% of our project. And so, some easy math here. If we had the 100,000 request, we're going to divide that by that 75%, and we're going to get that match amount through these couple of calculations. Again, this will be available on our ODF website, and if you want to go back and sort of look at these, you will be able to do so. Also, feel free to reach out to me again if you have questions on that. All right, in the application, you will see the PDF version of the application, I should say. You will see this measurable outcomes table. This table is not in the online version of the application. It's provided to us as we are applying to try to help us compile our accomplishments section. So, in addition, if your application is awarded, it will help you if you have an idea of all of these categories for your project. It will help you with your reporting later on. So, something to look through, kind of have an idea about what your numbers will be. But again, it will not show in the online version of the application. Again, a little bit more about the accomplishments section. Last year in 2023, the Forest Service provided us a document that was top scoring narrative answers. And this is one that they gave us for the accomplishment section. And so a good example just to share with folks, just to see how they compiled it, how they addressed their timeline in this, and how they were pretty specific. I know this text is a little small, so I've tried to make it bigger here on this next slide. Um, so they've really broken down the timeline very specifically. We do have 7,500 character count for each box. And so, you know, choose your level of specificity, but this is one that the Forest Service is saying, yes, was a good example and scored well. So this group chose to break it down by quarter and what they're going to do each quarter. Your organization might choose to break it down by, first year season by spring or, fall or what have you. But just showing, yes, we're going to get this project done. Yes, this is our plan for completion. So always good to make sure you meet those criteria there for the timeline. Just wanting to reiterate, this application total points possible is 100, and 40 of those 100 total points are in the scores of those three priority boxes. So something to really consider and think about. That low income community, the severe disaster impact, and wildfire hazard potential. Significant portion of the score in that one. At the end of the NOFO, you'll find this page. It's a nice little checklist. I just wanted to draw your attention to. Kind of read through that. Make sure you've addressed all of the requirements and the documentation required. You know, it would be a shame to forget maybe a link or something like that and then not get the points for that box if the link is required. So good to really read through and have a good understanding of what is needed there. Some questions that we often get as far as if you have proposals that include multiple communities. This language is from the Forest Service directly, and so if you have a separate project in separate communities, separate applications within that forestrygrants.org will need to be submitted for each community. And this is for purposes of determining eligibility. So, and the prioritization and ranking. So one community might show as low income in the documentation, the CWDG tool, and maybe the other community doesn't. So something to really consider if you're considering, your project being in multiple communities. If you have a single project that spans multiple communities, the project can be applied for and described within the same application and narrative form. And the example that they give for us that's pretty clear is if you have a contiguous fire break through different communities. So one part of your project would not be able to be fully complete without the other, essentially. These two are questions from last year's frequently asked questions document that the Forest Service provided us. Asking, these are a couple of questions that I was asked quite often, and so just wanted to read through both of them. The first one, are the data sets available on the CWDG website the only sources for claiming eligibility and priority points? And so the data sets linked on the website are only one source for claiming eligibility or priority points. The low income status must meet the definition provided in the NOFO. However, for the priorities of severe disaster and the wildfire hazard, a community may use other sources to claim eligibility or priority, but they must list the source of this claim in their application. So you are able to try to make your case with that. You know, it's hard to say whether whether you would get the points for that or not, but certainly nothing's preventing you from trying, right? And this other one here is number 14 in that FAQ document. Can a homeowner activities be used as match if you are, this refers to, in-kind match. For example, if a community is requesting grant money for a chipping day, can homeowners document the hours they worked cutting and piling brush in preparation for the chipping day? And so the answer to that is homeowners cannot count the time spent working on their own property because the homeowners would be considered beneficiaries and their time will not count as match. The work that the homeowners are doing is for their own benefit rather than a public benefit. This is a different scenario than a group of volunteers getting together to cut pile brush in a public space where the public at large or the community is the beneficiary. So hopefully that helps kind of clarify that piece of it for folks if they're wanting to count that as match. Just a few tips for successful grant proposals that I've compiled here. Um, be sure to read through the notice of funding opportunity. For this NOFO, scoring criteria begins on page 13, and then application form instructions that we touched on a little bit begin on page 21. So dive into there. Sometimes you really need to read both of those additional, descriptions to really gather what that question is asking for in that box. Develop an appropriate project. Study the scoring sheet closely to understand the grantor's priorities and use each one clearly. Write to your audience. So for our Western applications, they're going to be scored by other state forestry agency staff. They might not be familiar with Oregon. You might have someone from Nebraska that is looking at your application and scoring it. So really try to describe your landscape thoroughly. Describe maybe the population very thoroughly to think about someone that isn't familiar with Oregon at all. If you use acronyms, be sure to also explain them. Be direct. Be consistent throughout your document. Have a good, clean budget, one that is project ready upon award. Double check the math in your budget table compared to your budget narrative section. If the math is off, a lot of scorers may deduct points there. So something to really double check. Organize your thoughts well for each question. If a question requires information that you have already listed in a previous box, still do include that information as part of your answer. Don't worry about necessarily redundancy for this application. They would like it if each box could stand on its own. So, which is why the Forest Service has allowed us such a high character count for each one. And then finally, have others proofread your document when you're finished. It's always nice to pull in someone that maybe isn't even familiar with, mitigation activities or something just to make sure it's clear, see if they have any good feedback for you. Touching a little bit on reporting if your application is funded. Some things to consider, kind of just thinking in the back of your mind, what might be your workload if your application is funded. Financial reports will be due quarterly. And so I've just listed the quarters here. Those reports are due within 30 days of quarter end. Performance reports will be due annually. If you have asked for equipment in your application, there are additional guidelines, additional steps that you would need. There is an equipment justification form where you would talk through the piece of equipment, describe it. In addition, it's also a good idea to, in your narrative, justify your equipment purchase, why the project needs to purchase this equipment versus maybe renting or leasing it. The federal grant management education is also an eligible cost to include in your proposal. If your organization is not super familiar with managing federal grants, that is a great opportunity to just put that, check into some educational classes and put that cost into your budget. Sometimes the cost of those classes can be pretty significant. And so just wanting to remind everyone that that is eligible. And then if you are interested in applying and do not yet have an application link that I've given you, go ahead and send me an email letting me know that you're requesting the application link to the online version of your application. I'll create it with the name of your organization, so that's how it will show up in the database. The link will be specific to your organization. If you change the name of your application, you are free to do so. But try to let me know if you can, just because that's how I'm tracking from my end. I'm tracking by title of applications. And then notify me when your application is complete, when you're fully done. And then I'm able to submit it fully from my view. If you are working with ODF as one of your partners, please let me know for tracking purposes, just so I can have an eye on where those ODF entities are coming into play. In addition, tribes are able to apply through the state NOFO, so that would be through a link that I create. They will also be able to apply through the tribal NOFO. So there is a national tribal representative, and so there are two different ways of them being able to apply. Same application, same process for scoring. But if you have other questions, I can sure help you with that. And we'll finish up with just talking about the proposed timeline for CWDG round 3. The Forest Service is offering those every other week office hours. You can attend those. You can also attend the weekly office hours that I'll be hosting throughout the next couple of months on Tuesday afternoons. Reminder that the application period closes February 28th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. And then after the application period closes, your applications are gonna go through a few steps. So that will take several months. First, the application verification, CWDG adjudication period, review and scoring will happen, statistical normalization and analysis, a QC period, and then briefings of awardee list. The Forest Service is hoping will come out by sometime summer of this year. Sharing my contact information again, just in case. Feel free to give me a call, send me an email. If you have additional concerns or questions that we don't kind of go through right now. And then we will open it up for Q&A. And so feel free, if you haven't already, to go ahead and put your questions in that Q&A box down at the bottom toolbar. Also, if you want to ask your question, we can unmute you. So go ahead and raise your hand. That raise hand feature is under that React heart, looks like down there at the bottom toolbar. And Brittany's going to kind of help me make sure I don't skip any of these questions as we're answering them. And then she'll help me also if someone has their hands raised. So I think initially we'll just kind of go through these questions in the Q&A box. Let's see, and then we'll get to hands. So bear with us here. All right, and looks like we have a question. If we are doing a hazard tree inventory in an area next to federal lands, can trees on the federal lands also be included in the inventory, or is that work on federal lands? That is a good question, and one that I have asked the Forest Service recently, just because there's, a lot of similar projects. And so the answer that they gave me is the land ownership determines the eligibility. So these funds are directed toward privately owned, state, county lands. And so, yeah, the federal lands would not be an actual eligibility area. Okay, next question. Question about group CWDG applications. Are they allowed? Are they allowed? Where can I find this information and learn about best practices here? And what about right sizing the application, number of organization involved, number of projects, deciding who should be the main applicant, how to show pass-through funding to partners in the budget. Um, they have a collaborative cohort of mitigation partners in Southern Oregon. All good questions for sure. And so group applications are definitely allowed. How you determine who will be the primary applicant is, really up to your group. Kind of, be warned that the primary applicant would be responsible for all the reporting. The other organizations involved can be maybe just involved on a partner level. They could also be considered a subrecipient. And so, funding goes to them. Also, partners, I don't know if your project will allow, but it could be a contract. You are directing the work for this certain partner or organization, and so then a partner, or I'm sorry, a contract relationship might be more ideal. But I'm happy to talk further with you about that. And if you want to send me an email, we can definitely set up a time to kind of dive into that a little bit further. Another question that looks like here about the geographic area covered. Currently, our round two CWDG award covers 2 counties, but now Curry County CBOs are interested in collaborating on efforts. Okay, so I would say really probably, this grant is focused on more of the community level. So, if you can articulate why they might be connected, that's something that you're able to do. If you're able to maybe do separate applications for one area, that might also be a good option. For the in-kind match, can a fire district use volunteer training hours? Or say the department spends time pile burning from previous projects or assists an HOA with burning. Can those hours be used? Should we calculate our match even if we request a waiver? If you request a waiver, there is no need to show match. You'll just simply say, we request the waiver, and you wouldn't have to address it further in your budget narrative. So that is very nice. If you have maybe some other, the volunteer hours that you would contribute, toward match, you can always, if you qualify for the match waiver, list those in your collaboration box. You can definitely speak to how, these different entities or organizations are collaborating and adding to the scope of your project, the reach maybe, or the benefit of your project. Anything that you want to try to count toward in-kind match, you would want to make sure that they follow the same eligibility rules as any of the projects. So it would have to be a similar project, same area, same timeline. So those can be nuances that can be a little bit tricky. And again, I'm happy to chat through that a little bit more with you one-on-one if you'd like. All right, and then do we have any hands up? I'm seeing questions from 1103, but I can just keep going through the Q&As that are typed in here. I don't see any hands up at this point. But definitely if you do want to say something, feel free and we'll get to you as well. All right. Let's see, next one here. Do you think that priority points for low-income community would be awarded to an application for a project located in a community that was not identified as low income overall, but where the activities are targeted toward low-income landowners? That is a good question, Laura. And I'd be uncertain if the points would be awarded, but you can certainly try to articulate that. Um, if your community is not showing as low income, but you can speak to the fact that each activity is definitely for these low income landowners. It might be, a little bit tricky to find some documentation or a source to go with that, but nothing's going to prevent you from trying. So, and looks like I see your question here, Simone. I think I saw your hand up, but thank you for putting it in the Q&A box. Um, let's see here. For maintaining equipment that gets purchased with CWDG funds, what budget category should those funds fall into, assuming it's an eligible cost? Um, Maintaining equipment, that is a good question and one for maintenance. I believe it might go into the other category, but let me double check um, and get back to you. You might also of course, you're going to include it, talk about it in your narrative, but I'm uncertain whether it would be in the other category or if you would include it in your equipment. So, okay, next question. Looks like it's from Melissa. Wasco County is already a CWDG recipient of round 2 funding. If we were awarded additional funding for round 3, would that be a whole new grant that would require its own quarterly reporting, or would the round 3 funds be added to our current award? Good question, Melissa, and it would be a brand new award. So you would do like you have done, all the agreement, all the paperwork. You would have to do that again, and it would be a fully standalone new award. All right, and next question here. If submitting an application for a CWPP and for wildfire mitigation, will we need to request 2 organization application links? Yes, you would need to request 2 links, one for the CWPP proposal and one for the mitigation project proposal. That is a great question. Okay, looks like we've got one more question here in the Q&A from Jenny. If I have 3 different geographic areas that are not connected and have separate polygons, do I need an application for each of them? Or do I put 3 different lat longs in the same application? Great question. So it sort of depends on how you want to go about it. If you feel that the areas are spread out enough that they are really not the same community or not connected, um, you can separate them. I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood the question here as I'm reading it a little bit more. Um, for the application, you can simply list one polygon in that first page where it's asking of the area where you're working. Um, or you can list three different lat longs. You can do that as well. And so then if your question was, should we have them in the same application? Similarly, if you feel like, they're not connected enough and they're sort of different communities, you can have three different applications for that area. Or if you want to make the case, that they are really one community and the projects are similar or have enough to do with the other, that you're putting them in the same application, then that would be reasonable as well. You would just need to, make your argument there that they are related. All right. And Tucker, yes, feel free to reach out to me and we can follow up with some additional details there. And it looks like it's 11:15. And so still have time for any other questions that folks might have. If you want to raise your hand, or we'll leave that Q&A box open for a bit longer. And you'll see Brittany has put several links into the chat, just as good resources. Specifically, the Oregon Department of Forestry page does have everything listed there, as well as that one-pager resource links document, several sources. Okay, I'll give it about another minute and we'll see if anything comes to mind. We are having office hours. I will say that again. Today starts the first of the office hours, and it is this afternoon from 3 to 4 on Zoom. And so if you're, have questions that we didn't get to, feel free to join, and I'll just take questions as they come from folks. Do my best to get those answered. All right, well, it does look like our questions have stopped. And so, folks, thanks for joining. Um, again, reach out as you are working through things. I'm happy to have a conversation and brainstorm with you along the way. Good luck to everyone as they're putting their proposals together. Bye-bye.